Good evening. I don't think my mic is on. It's on the check. Good evening. I would like to call tonight's meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Searcy,
Here.
Councilmember Landman. Here. Councilmember DeBala. There's no-
Just
I'm
talk.
here. Councilmember Schlegel. Councilmember Gilbert.
Here.
Councilmember Hanzak.
Present.
Councilmember Wesselek.
Here.
Great. Well, just as a reminder, a little bit of housekeeping for my colleagues. We have the different mics this evening. So I do not have a window into who has hit a button. So I'm just going to ask again for people to raise your hand if you have a question, and to please, let's work on the honor system and make sure that everyone gets around. For tonight's meeting, there are no changes to the agenda. We have one proclamation this evening recognizing Black History Month. We will have our legislative updates by our lobbyist and CCOT from Annapolis. We will have public comments this evening, council comments, city manager comments, and then we have the adoption of minutes from November 18th, November the 20th, December the 4th, January the 15th, and January the 25th. Followed by two presentations. The first is the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, or SDAT, information and Q&A on property assessment, on the property assessment process. We also have our second presentation this evening is a quarterly financial report for FY25 first quarter. On Wednesday, February the 12th, the council will meet at 7:30, and we will begin with a legislative update. We will then have voting sessions, the single reading ordinance authorizing execution of contract of stormwater system cleaning and video inspection services, tentative single reading ordinance authorizing extension of a contract with NZI construction for street, sidewalk, and stormwater construction. We are tentatively slated to have a voting session on the resolution adopting council priorities. Please note that this may be changed to a work session depending on the consolidated feedback that's received to date. We will have a presentation, work session, capital improvement program, CIP, equipment replacement reserve, ERR, fleet review, and street maintenance. We also will have a work session tentatively slated to discuss the board and committee appointment recommendations. On Friday, February the 14th is Valentine's Day. On Monday, February the 17th is President's Day. City offices and facilities are closed Sunday and Monday for the President's Day holiday. On Wednesday, February the 19th, the council will meet at its regular time of 7:30. We will have two proclamations. The first is a proclamation recognizing Lee Jordan Day of February the 23rd. The second is proclamation recognizing Invasive Species Awareness Week, which is February the 24th through the 28th. We'll have a legislative update, and then we will have presentation from our business associations, Long Branch Business League, Tacoma Langley Crossroads Development Authority, and the Old Tacoma Business Association. We will have a voting session. It's a consent agenda, resolutions providing for the appointment to boards and committees, and then a presentation or work session on revenue sources, commercial, railroad, and public utility taxes and vacant property taxes and fees. Okay. So with that, we are going to move to our proclamation in recognition of Black History Month. And given the attacks on DEI that is facing our country, this proclamation is even more meaningful. Whereas during Black History Month, we reflect on the sacrifices and celebrate the many achievements and significant contributions made by African Americans to our economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development. And whereas the 2025 national theme for Black History Month is African Americans in Labor, in consideration of the collective work of Black people over the history of the United States. And whereas the city of Tacoma Park recognizes the racial and ethnic diversity enriches our community and acknowledges the challenges that African Americans face in achieving equity, opportunity, and social mobility. And whereas we also recognize Tacoma Park's own history of segregation, racial covenants, and discrimination that contributed to lower rates of home ownership and lower incomes in the city's Black community. And whereas diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging continues to be priorities for the city, and we are committed to working with our community to eradicate racism in all forms, to provide an inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable future for all. Now, therefore, I, Talisha Searcy, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, do hereby proclaim February 2025 as Black History Month in the City of Tacoma Park and encourages all residents this month and throughout the year to learn, observe, celebrate, and honor Black history and culture. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to our legislative update. Do we have Ann on the line? Hello, Ann. Ann Seacott, our legislative lobbyist in Annapolis, is here, and there's been a lot going on. So, Ann, if you wouldn't mind taking it away.
Sure has been a lot. Good evening, everyone. We are just in terms of where we are in the session, almost a full third of the way through. We've hit the deadline for Senate bill introductions. And so we've seen the bulk of Senate bills, and the House deadline for introductions is tomorrow. So we will see Friday many House bills. So the legislative work group of the council will have a lot of work to do in the next couple of weeks. With that said, and certainly on the heels of, appropriately on the heels of the proclamation just adopted, the mayor will be testifying tomorrow on a bill in support of a fix to the bill we had supported a couple of years ago related to unlawful restrictive covenants, and testifying in favor of the bill that will hopefully fix the problem and allow the city to move forward with completing that project. We are working feverishly with Delegate Charkoudian on a bill that is still in the Montgomery County delegation related to liquor stores, and trying to figure out the right language of the bill to have it get enough support to get supported by the delegation. We're working on that. There have been a couple of the pretty major immigration bills that just got introduced related to sensitive areas and data privacy. So we'll be working on those. We got an invitation to testify on the Renew Act in the Senate next week. We are going to be hopefully putting together some support for a bill related to the Purple Line and some free advertising or ridership options for businesses that have been affected by the construction. And we just got scheduled a hearing for the good cause eviction legislation on the 18th of the month. So those are just the things as of now. There might be a few more before we're done.
Yes. And thank you so much, Ann, and our working group that have been following and working on tons of reviews of bills, and also our staff. I know that we've been pinging them a lot as it relates to reviewing language and helping with making sure that we're capturing the right language in our testimonies. Do we have any questions for Ann? Councilmember DeBala.
I would just like to know when the Renew Act hearing is. Do you happen to know? I can look it up, but I thought you might.
It's on the 13th.
13.
Thank you.
And do we know what time on the 13th? No.
1 o'clock is when the hearing
Oh,
is.
yeah, that's right. And I'm double booked, so we'll talk. Yep. Councilmember Hanzak?
And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the immigration bills related to sensitive areas. Is there any need for us to find anybody to testify, for example? And I don't mean necessarily immigrants. I'm thinking like maybe principals of schools or on their behalf making a statement or something like that.
So I'll be on a call tomorrow morning with, it's a group of organizations and individuals facilitated by CASA. And we'll have a discussion, I think, about what they and what the sponsors of the bills would like to see at the hearings. So we'll be getting up to speed on that tomorrow.
Okay, any other questions for Ann? Councilmember Schlegel?
We had a community meeting on sidewalks and traffic calming requests from residents, and a couple times during that meeting, questions arose about that related to things where we would need state legislation to change things. And perhaps some of my colleagues already know what's happening with changes to the rules for installing stop sign cameras, and I think for lowering the speed limit without an engineering study.
So Ann, I know that we submitted testimony in support of the bill that would allow for dropping the speed limit without an engineering study. I defer to my colleagues on whether or not, again, a lot of bills have come in like late or around this time, so maybe we just haven't seen it yet, on whether or not there's any bills around stop sign cameras.
There should be.
I don't
I
recall seeing.
it yet, have we?
I think there is. I will double check and we'll discuss it in a little more depth on Friday.
Any other questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Ann. We really appreciate it, and we will circle back with you specifically as it pertains to scheduling for folks to be in Annapolis or to testify.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Excellent. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Okay. We're going to move to public comments this evening. Do we have any public comments? Don't be shy. Come on down.
Very intimidating.
Now I have no control over your mic, so you'll have to, yes,
Just
All
let me know if you can't hear me.
I can hear you.
Very good.
Excellent.
Thank you very much. My name is David Reed. I'm Ward 2. Over the past weeks, I've had the pleasure of working with an informal budget working group based in the community. As analysts and researchers, we're trying to better understand the city's budgeting process for the simple reason that people can't afford the city's high taxes. People are hurting, not just homeowners, but renters and owners of multi-family buildings alike. People are housing burdened. One of the many threads that our group has been examining and understanding our high taxes is the growth of the number of city employees. As the city manager presented in his budget, personnel constitutes 55% of all city expenditures. That's not surprising. City government is fundamentally about providing services to the public, and you need qualified personnel to do that. However, are you aware that between FY14 and FY24, the number of full-time employees has increased by 18 new staff members? And certainly you know that during that same 10-year period, the city's population has actually gone down 1%. So we have to ask, why have we added 18 new government employees for the same number of residents? What's going on? We have seen that has been a disproportionate increase in full-time employees in just one or two departments. There have not been disproportionate increases. For instance, DPW staff grew by 5 FTEs, housing community development by 3, public safety by 4, general management 3, and communications by 3, and so on. It's a fairly even expansion across government. But taken together, we now have 18 new FTEs. All the while, our population has remained about the same for the past decade. Have our city services greatly improved over the decade? Are crime figures down dramatically? Is the volume of refuse collected significantly higher? The metrics and the data are non-existent or fuzzy, so we really can't answer those questions. But we do ask, is the city adding a new level of higher paid administrators, promoting managers, excuse me, to directors, sergeants to lieutenants, and creating a second deputy city manager out of a temporary position? Or are we encouraging mission creep by adding a sustainability manager who in turn requires new funding staff in order to finance the position? So please consider that the consumer price index for urban workers has increased 67% over the past 20 years. At the same time, the city's property tax revenues have increased by 127%. That's almost double the taxes relative to the cost of living adjustments. Doesn't something seem a little bit out of kilter? Why are city taxes double those of surrounding municipalities? So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to sharing more analysis from the Community Budget Working Group during our upcoming public forum in early March. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other general public comments this evening?
Hello, I'm Therese Gibson, live on Pine Avenue, and I'm a member of the Community Budget Working Group. Our city manager has noted that a structural deficit exists in our budgeting. With this, and with residents feeling stressed due to increased property taxes, it seems a good time to refrain from non-routine capital projects. I was surprised to learn of the capital project for which the city has asked District 20 representatives for $500,000 funding for public works, building design, and rehabilitation. The council noted that some employees are using porta potties, so a bathroom is needed and there is need for additional work bays. Now, this left me wondering exactly what was constructed with the $3.69 million public works project that was completed in 2011. This work was reported to include updated locker rooms, bathroom, and individual shower stall facilities for employees. According to a 2012 city report, the following additions were also made: a truck washing facility, covered spaces for vehicles, more equipment and material storage space, multiple building upgrades, including new HVAC and the addition of a break room and conference room. Further, a new infill building between renovated structures was constructed. I wonder if the city could share exactly what the money was spent on in 2011, as it seems as if we are asking much of the same work this month. I don't know how many work bays are needed, given that we have 5 sanitation collection trucks in 2024, and we had 6 sanitation collection trucks in 2011 when the last capital project was completed. When the city manager noted the $500,000 budget request in December 2024, no cost details were available as to what the $500,000 was for, other than for general planning. Do we have specific information yet about what is intended with the $500,000? Given our budget crisis and the addition of other capital projects the city is considering, it may be a good idea to withdraw the $500,000 state funding request and delay this public works facility capital project. If not, would the city open the public works facility to a tour for residents so that we can see exactly what work is needed? Such a tour was offered in 2009 by City Manager Barbara Matthews for the last work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other general public comments this evening? Come on down, come on down. I'm about to bang the gavel and move to virtual. Come on down.
Hi, good evening. I'm Elizabeth Wallace. I'm in Ward 1. I didn't actually professionally prepare these comments, so please bear with me. For many years, I live on a fixed income, Social Security. For many years, I kept looking at the homeowner's property tax credit, hoping that the $200,000 cap on the assets would go up sometime, because my assets were just over the 200. So I've been living pretty frugally, hoping it would make it to the 200 cap. But one day I decided in April 23 to contact SDAT and asked, where did they come up with the 200K in the first place? And so I was told that it was determined to be 200K in 1978 and hadn't been changed since then. So in 1978, it's equivalent in purchasing power today to about $922,000. Now, in April of 23, I brought to Laura Charkudian's attention that the homeowner's property tax credit needed to be reviewed. My impetus for writing to her was that because many seniors want to age in place if physically possible, and you may agree that less of a tax burden might help. How many people could have qualified for it if it had been indexed for inflation? And how many others lost their homes or felt forced to move or buy elsewhere where the tax and assessment burden was not so great? So I sent so Lorg and her office responded favorably to that at first, had some meetings with organizations like, well, with SDAT, Public Policy Partners, Habitat for Humanity, Purple Line Corridor Coalition, Mayor of Tacoma Park, City Council Member Cindy DeBala, and representative of some nonprofit developer. I don't know who that was. Some of the attendees seem to be more focused on low-income wage earners and not or new home buyers, and less on those who were seniors. I myself have been here for 30 years and paying taxes for 30 years. That's why I'm bringing this to your attention again. Now you can't, Laura submitted something, but it wasn't geared towards seniors. Okay, she made a decision about that. So we can talk about that in another time, and I got 30 seconds left. But if we can't do anything about that at the state level, then maybe you really need to take a look at it at the city level where you can determine the rate. And maybe there should be a different rate for seniors. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other general public comments this evening?
Buddy Daniels, 908 Prospect Street. Recently, it's come to my attention. I've been attending a number of different organizing meetings the last few weeks that have been trying to keep our way of life and fighting back, our way of life and diversity. And for many years, as you know, I chaired the Tacoma Park Democratic Caucus and also ran different political campaigns, certainly on the council level, county level, and state level. And we did it the old-fashioned way. It was a number of years ago, back when I had hair and I was good looking. Well, I ain't good looking anymore and I don't have any hair. But in a meeting, 2 meetings recently, I discussed how we did phone trees. Now, realizing today that this is what we use, I still try to put a quarter in it. But the bottom line is, helping organizations develop a phone tree through these or whatever means, or old phones, and or helping certain organizations develop literature drops, showing them how to develop literature drops safely, working with maps and whatnot, is what I used to do for the whole city and also parts of Montgomery County. So to the council, the mayor, if you know of any new startup organizations that may need some help with that, sort of the old-fashioned way, I'm more than happy to volunteer to discuss and show them how to organize certain types of communication and outreach for sure. I myself have been contacting and going around by phone or email to different of our established organizations and some of the newer startup organizations. It's my pleasure to try to help out. I also be contacting our state representatives, senator, and certainly council representatives. And for what it's worth, my home, and I don't mind giving my home phone number out. Years ago, there probably were 1,000 people who had it or more in the city. Doesn't mean I was popular, it just means I got a lot of phone calls. But my number now is 240-643-1373. And I do try to answer it. Okay, when it's charged. My email is buddycdaniels, the number 2, @gmail.com. And if people email me, phone me, or want to make contact, I'll be glad to try to help out in any situation with outreach and discuss it. So, and I figured the council would certainly have some ideas also and have heard about organizations starting up and or established organizations like Cheer, CASA, people like that. And I'm contacting them also. So what if we overlap? We need to overlap we can get right now. So thank you all very much.
Thank
Talk
you
to you.
very much. Do we have any other general public comments this evening?
Colleen Cordes, Ward 1. I'm going to be speaking about ideas for financial sustainability, given that we have a chronic budget deficit. And so first of all, and I want to talk about possible options for the council, the city manager, and his staff to explore. Specifically thinking about personnel cost, ways to think about personnel costs, shaving off some savings that would be done in a fair way and that would not affect or impact permanent employees who are making more modest levels of salary. So first, I'm really urging that the council and city manager plan in the fiscal 26 budget to already preparing to sunset those 3 ARPA positions that were supposed to be temporary. There were multiple statements by the council that those 3 ARPA positions were supposed to be temporary, fully funded by ARPA. I know that the current ARPA director is resigned, leaving at the end of March, I think, and only half of his salary this year was coming from that. And I don't know quite what happened to those other 2 positions, but please at least plan to sunset those 3 positions so that there isn't an unintentional creeping up of personnel costs. So secondly, here are 3 ideas which together could save more than $250,000. The first is to refrain from refilling the second deputy city manager job because that will have some immediate savings. I know it's only half funded from general funds this year, but that amount of money immediately would be saved. And in the long term, you'd be saving something like, in today's or next year's money, $262,000 with fringe and salary. By not having a second deputy city manager, we have very expert, and unusually, a city manager and deputy city manager with unusual levels of expertise. And so we're a small town, 17,500 people. We can't afford a second deputy city manager, and we don't really need one. The second which would shave about $60,000, is to limit the salary increase for senior staff to 2.5%, which is what the federal COLA increase for folks on fixed incomes is. It's actually above what federal employees are getting this year. They're only getting 2%, and of course, many of them are uncertain about their jobs. So 2.5% would save about $60,000 if compared to the 4.6% that was in the financial forecast. The third idea would save $64,000, and that would be to revert the communications director position back to the communications manager. That went from $84,000 in fiscal year 24 to $140,000 when it was reclassified as a director instead of a manager. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other general public comments? Okay. Do we have virtual comments this evening?
We have 1 commenter on Zoom, Mary Machui.
Okay. Mary Jane, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. My son was just taking out the trash. Hi, happy Black History Month. I would like to say that I'm concerned why the fan person didn't say anything about the $200 million cut that's proposed for the Developmental Disabilities Administration. That's going to hurt a lot of us. And I don't know why you all didn't. It really, really makes me upset that none of you even mentioned it. You don't seem to care, and it really hurts my feelings and people like us. We are the DEI dredges. My son, not only is Black, he's autistic, he's DEI on the bottom of the barrel. But why don't you stand up for him? You stand up for everybody, every other person but him. And it's when we're talking about Black history, I I moved into this town in 1985, first living in apartments, really horrible apartments on Lee Avenue, which have since been renovated, with my Black husband. And I'll tell you, there were a lot more Black homeowners then. Because I did a lot of walking because we didn't have a car for 3 years. But I did a lot of walking. See, there were a lot more. Now there are a lot of those Black people have left, and their places have been turned into 3 times as big and wealthy. Have to be wealthy. Mostly white people moving in. I don't see how these people can afford these $1 million houses. Swear to God, I don't. But anyways, I just have one thing here to say about ARPA. My son never got a cent from ARPA because he doesn't know how. He's too depressed and upset and too disabled to fill out the form. Okay, so he didn't get a cent for it. So anyways, no speed hump. Way to save money is stop these darn speed humps. I have osteoporosis, and going over these bumps hurts me and might do damage to me and people like me. A lot of senior women have osteoporosis or something similar, and it's painful going over those speed humps. Why can't you have a moratorium on speed humps except in front of daycare centers, elementary schools, and senior disabled buildings? Allow them there where they belong, not 5 of them, 3 blocks of Boyd Avenue. Anyways, and thank you very much, and you all have a good week.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Do we have any other virtual comments this evening?
No.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to move to council comments. Do you have any council comments this evening? Councilmember Dabala.
Yes, I just wanted to thank the staff from all the different departments for the great meeting, the workshop that was held yesterday. It went very smoothly. I think people who were there felt heard, and comments that, at least that I got from folks who couldn't be there, have been passed on. I think there was a lot of useful information from the residents' perspective about what they see on the ground that was shared. And thank you for doing that. That's all.
Thank you, Councilmember Dabala. Any Councilmember Westlake?
I'm just going to echo what Councilmember Dabala said, that I also wanted to really thank all the staff that worked on it. I know a lot of work went into it, and it was a really great conversation. So really thank you. And also to really thank the residents that either filled out the form in advance, the ones that were there in person that were able to speak up. Thank you for everyone who participated. And hopefully, I think there's going to be some good progress from it.
Thank you, Councilmember Westlake. Councilmember Honzak.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start by just saying thank you to our mayor, because I know she's been doing a lot of work on our behalf behind the scenes during this really difficult time, and to our staff that I know have also been supporting all of those efforts. And I also would like to just declare our solidarity with all of the people who are right now experiencing job loss, uncertainty, fear. I know this is a really scary time, and I know the mayor addressed this somewhat last week. But it's really, I spent the morning at the USAID protests this morning outside of the Capitol. And I have to say, I went alone, and when I got there, I ran into so many of our fellow residents from the city of Tacoma Park, and that is not surprising because of who we are. And so as we all go through these incredibly difficult times together, I just want to say thank you to my neighbors for being who you are. And as we know that many of our neighbors, I've encountered just 3 of them this morning who everyone lost their jobs. They don't know what's going to happen. We're going to have to work harder than ever to embrace one another and and I urge us to give out as much positive energy to one another as we can, and grace. There's going to be anger. There already is a lot of anger around us. We already had a lot of anger going on, a lot of distrust. So as we hear people firing off angry comments, I mean, we all are going to need to scream and protest and organize, but I hope that people will give one another grace more than ever, and lean on your neighbors and ask them if they need something, and help them travel comfortably without shame if people need to go to their local food bank. Maybe everybody can go out together so that everyone can feel that this is the thing that we do together, and we can share meals, and we can make sure that everyone is taken care of. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Honzak. Councilmember Slagle?
Thank you, Mayor Searcy. Councilmember Honzak, to your point, I'm starting to have office hours now that I'll hold at various locations, and a couple days ago, it was very heartening to have a USAID contractor in my ward come by, and with all of the things that she and people she knows are reeling with, what came through was how much her heart is going out to people in other countries who are losing access to services, or even maybe their personal security because of what's going on, and also her personal generosity in saying that if there's anything that the city wants to organize around just getting people together who have been affected as employees or contractors with the federal government, getting them together and just beginning a conversation of what they may need, and putting them in touch with resources. I thought that was very generous and something that I would support. Just a couple of other things with the sidewalk and traffic calming meeting last night. As Councilmember Devala and Westwelk said, like, it was a great meeting, and one of the things I think that was striking to me was one resident who pointed out that if you look just at data, like number of crashes or collisions or incidents at an intersection or along a block, you aren't seeing what people aren't even attempting to do anymore because of their perception of danger. They may not be taking their kids out on the sidewalk. They may not be going out for walks. They may not be allowing kids to play in the street. And so it reminded me that we have to take people's perceptions very seriously, even though we're trying to be objective with data. Perceptions are a reality that changes what people are experiencing, and that relates to some of what our public commenters said this evening about the burden on taxpayers, and as Mary Jane Machuen said, the people who have left, families who have left, and we're not hearing from them anymore, but they're simply not here because to some extent the taxes drove them out. And then last, related to perceptions, one of the issues that a couple issues around the junction that I'm still paying attention to closely are the noise coming from the co-op's HVAC system. It certainly continues to be a very serious concern for residents in that area, and I am doing what I can to work towards a harmonious solution. And likewise, the perception of continuing traffic impacts at the fire station intersection. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel. Any other? Councilmember Landman.
Thank you very much. I also want to thank the staff for yesterday's traffic calming meeting. I think one of the signal qualities about it that was so wonderful was the open give and take between the city staff and residents and the department, the police department representatives who was there. I think it really helps to have that kind of a dialogue, and it's different from the setting that we have in city council meetings, and it's a very positive thing. So I appreciate that it was done and that the plans were explained with such clarity. Even when it's bad news that it's going to take a few years to get there, it's great for people to know that their projects are going to be considered in an organized fashion like that. I want to also say in commenting on the current political situation, how lucky we are to be represented by Jamie Raskin, who has been one of the key spokespeople for the government employees and the other many vulnerable groups that have been hit hard by some of the insanity that's occurring downtown and at every agency you can think of. And I want to also say thank you to my neighbors who have been posting information routinely about where one can go to express one's opposition to some of the activities that have been going on. In response to a comment from one of my Ward 1 residents, Ms. Wallace, I just wanted to note that we did discuss the legislation that you mentioned, having worked on with Lord Charcuti, and when we talked about our city's priorities, the effort to raise the cap for the tax break, and we're told when we had that discussion that it was going to be dead on arrival in the legislature, probably because of the tax budget implications for the state. So unfortunately, that bill is not in the cards for this year, but I agree with you that this is a significant problem as people's houses have become more valuable, but their incomes have been not keeping pace. So we have to keep working on that and looking at how the city can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Landman. Any other comments this evening? Okay. To echo my colleague's sentiment, as a federal employee, I stand in solidarity. I need to make sure I keep a job too. But definitely appreciate everyone's kind words and efforts to help. I think it is one of the true testaments to who we are as a community. And I love it when we live our values. It's one thing to talk about it, it's something totally different to be about it. So I appreciate my colleagues for raising the issue and advocating and candidly advocating for me. So thank you all so much. There's a lot of stuff going on, so bear with me. I want to thank the organizers of the Anna H. Wong concert series. I had an opportunity on Saturday to go to the Tacoma Park Presbyterian Church to hear the violinists Paul Hung and Helen Hung with dignitary from Taiwan to hear a concert series, and it was amazing. Absolutely talented artist, and it's always an honor when we're able to have such amazing art in the city of Tacoma Park. So I do want to thank them for that. Want to send my appreciation to our ASME union representatives. Councilmember DeBala and I had an opportunity to have a chat with them. For those who are not aware, one of the things that we're striving to do is to have quarterly check-ins with our union during those times in which we're not at the negotiation table, just to help to make sure that there is mechanisms of communication. And so I definitely want to thank the city's union leadership for participating in the meeting, as well as our city staff for participating, and notes or minutes from that meeting will be shared with the council once they're fully developed. I want to thank our county staff and Office of Management and Budget. For those that don't know, it's not just tax time in the city of Tacoma Park or budget time in the city of Tacoma Park. It's also budget time in Montgomery County. So I want to encourage everyone to make sure that you're advocating for funds at the county level as well. So we are, and I'm just saying this for our members of council that are new, it's time for tax dupe or tax duplication calculations. So I want to thank our city staff and staff from the county's OMB office and our chief for convening, just so that we can kind of walk through, make sure there's a shared understanding of the calculations as we are waiting to receive our final estimates in terms of what the city of Tacoma Park would receive in terms of its tax dupe allocation. I will be testifying. I'm going to be in multiple places around the same time tomorrow on the restricted covenant in Annapolis to advocate for the city on that front. Also, there is, the county will be here, county council will be hearing testimony on the CIP for the MCPS. So we will be putting forward testimony for that as well. And I think that is all I have. With that, I'll turn things over to our city manager for city manager comments.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, council and guests. From the police department, the Tacoma Park Police and the Tacoma Park Volunteer Fire Department plunged for Maryland's Special Olympics into the Chesapeake Bay, called the Polar Bear Plunge, on Friday, January 31st. Together, the two departments raised $1,500, and law enforcement Maryland-wide as a whole has currently raised over $336,000 for Special Olympics. I'd like to say thank you to all who donated to our city team. Just a few days left to donate new and gently used bath towels, beach towels, bathroom rugs, hand towels, washcloths, blankets, beds, toys, and unopened food to help the Montgomery County animal shelters. The police department will be collecting through Friday, February 7th. Please bring your donations to the Tacoma Park Police Department lobby, 7500 Maple Avenue, and we will get them to the animal shelters. Purple Line Road access alerts. On or about January 27th, the work crews began periodic lane closures during the nighttime at the intersection of Wayne Avenue and Fenton Street for approximately 2 weeks. These lane closures were necessary to facilitate utility testing. On or about February 17th, work crews will reduce Stewart Avenue to one lane, starting at Brookville Road, with alternating traffic for approximately 3 months. Parking on Stewart Avenue will be limited. This closure is necessary to allow track placement across Stewart Avenue. And on or about February 27th, Riggs Road will be limited to right turns only at the intersection with University Boulevard, MD 193, for approximately 4 weeks. Crews will establish a work zone in the center of University Boulevard to facilitate track and utility installation. The pedestrian crossing of University Boulevard will remain at Riggs Road. Additional signage will be in place to direct drivers to use the advanced detour routes to minimize the number of vehicles at the University Boulevard intersection. February is Awareness Month for National Cancer Prevention, American Heart Health, Teen Dating Violence. Resources have been posted in the police department's social media pages. And finally, from, once again, the police department, a shout out. In honor of Black History Month, the police department would like to give a shout out to former Chief Tony Fisher, who served as the first African-American chief in Tacoma Park. That was from 1983 through 1993. Fisher said that Tacoma Park was an identifiable community, and there was a feeling of identity and closeness among the people in Tacoma Park. That concludes my report this evening.
Thank you very much, City Manager DeSpirito. Okay, we're going to move to our next item, which is the adoption of minutes from November the 18th, November the 20th, December the 4th, January the 15th, and January the 25th. Do I have a motion to move the adoption of minutes?
Madam Chair, Mayor, sorry, there are a couple of typographical things I will bring to the city clerk's attention, but can that happen despite the fact that the minutes have been approved, or must that happen beforehand?
No, we can make those corrections.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And just as a reminder, for adoption of minutes, if everyone could please make sure your edits are submitted on time, because if it's substantial, then it may need to be shared. Okay, awesome. With other members of council. All right. Motion to move the adoption of minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilmember Lamon. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councilmember Dabala. All those in favor of the adoption of the minutes from November the 18th, November the 20th, December the 4th, January the 15th, and January the 25th, please say aye. Aye. Do you have any opposed? Any abstain? All right. Next, we're going to move to presentations for the evening. We are joined by staff from our State Department of Assessments and Taxation, SDAT, and they are prepared to provide us with information and a Q&A on the property assessment process. With that, I just want to make sure there's no introduction that our city management team would like to provide.
Right.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, and guests, and City Manager. I would like to take a moment to extend a warm welcome to Ms. Ava Garvey and her colleague, Brian Levinson, who have joined us tonight to present important information regarding the real property tax assessment, which is set to begin in 2025. Their experience will provide valuable insight into the assessment process, its implication, appeal process, and what we can expect moving forward. Ms. Garvey and Mr. Levinson, thank you for being here. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Thank you for having Brian and I this evening. Forgive me if my voice shakes a little bit. I'm not a great public speaker, but Brian is great at it, so I brought him along to present the appeal portion of the presentation, as he is the appeal specialist, so he'll be very, very good at that. Okay. How do I go forward? Okay. So, all right, we're going to go through an overview of the assessment process. Actually, I have it right here. Okay. So, there's a nice map of Maryland and the counties. Each office is located in the county seat. Our real property division is made up of our headquarters staff. That includes our director, our state supervisor, area supervisors. They are located in our Baltimore headquarters. And then there are the local offices that are located in each county seat, with our office being in the city of Rockville. Maryland has about 2.3 million properties, and approximately 1/3 of those properties are valued yearly. And Tacoma Park is located in the 1/3 of the Montgomery County properties that were valued for 2025. So there are 3 assessment groups. Geo 80, or Group 1, is where Tacoma Park is located in. Those assessments were effective for January 1st, 2025. Next year, Group 2 will be reassessed. That's Geo 81. And those assessments will be effective January 1st, 2026. And then Group 3, or Geo 82, will be assessed effective for January 1st, 2027. There are 3 main approaches to valuation. There's the cost approach, the income approach, and the sales comparison approach. cost and the cost approach and sales comparison are what's used for residential properties. And the income approach is used for commercial properties. And assessors have the latitude in determining the most appropriate method of valuation to estimate the market value of a property. So some examples of residential properties are single-family, townhouse, condominiums. Examples of commercial properties include office, retail, warehouse, and apartments. Assessing residential property. So the property worksheet has an estimate of the construction costs, an estimate of land value, the application of a market value indicator, which is also called a neighborhood adjustment indicator, is applied, and we validate our assessments against sales of like properties. Some physical attributes that we evaluate: the number of stories, the size of improvements, the type of construction, the quality of construction, the type of heat, finished basement, and other residential attributes. All those attributes are on your property worksheet if you ever request that from our office and take a look. It just describes your property, how it's assessed. We use a modeling system, which means we group like properties together as models, such as 2 stories, 1 stories, split foyer, split levels. Those are all modeled together and compared to sales of similar properties in the same model in order to come up with the assessments. We also consider the quality of construction and the style of construction in the models. And then the neighborhood adjustment index, which was also called a market value index, that accounts for current market influences. So every 3 years when we assess, we come up with a neighborhood adjustment index for each model type of property. And that index lets us know whether that particular model or style of property, if the assessment should go up or if it should go down based on the sales of like models of those properties. We use statistical measures to evaluate our assessments, and the International Association of Assessing Officers is where we get our standards from. So assessment notices: when you received your assessment notice back at the end of December or early January, they were mailed on December 30th, 2024. On that notice, it had your old market value and your new market value. It lists both land and buildings. The buildings were labeled as improvements, which caused quite a bit of confusion because some people thought that improvements meant that like home improvements or like renovations or something like that. But no, the word improvements just means buildings or improvements to land, meaning the land is improved with a house or improved with some sort of building. It also showed the taxable value. It also had the status of the homestead tax credit application and the occupancy status. And it also had the appeal deadlines, which that deadline by law is 45 days from the notice date. And this year, that is April 13th, I believe, April 13th. And it also has hearing options, and there are, I think 4 options to file an appeal. You can have a written appeal, a video appeal, in-person appeal. What am I missing? In-person, video, written, telephone. Yes. That's it. So increases in assessment are phased in over 3 years because, as I mentioned, we assess once every 3 years, but every year the tax bills go out around July, and each year the tax bills reflect the phased-in assessment, which is the difference between the old assessment and the new assessment. That difference divided by 3, and a third added to the base or the prior assessment. So so in this example, the previous value was 200,000, and the current value is 230,000, and the difference is 30,000. So 1/3 is added to the base assessment, which was 200,000. So 210 would be the phased-in assessment in 2025. 220,000 would be the phase-in assessment in 2026, and 230,000 would be the phase-in assessment in 2027. Changes in value as of the date of finality, which is always January 1. That is the date when the assessments become effective. And any increase in phase-in, any increase in phased-in is phased in over the next 3 years, as I explained before. Decreases remain the same for all 3 years. So when property values decrease, there is no increase to phase in over 3 years. So the value would stay flat at the new assessment for all 3 years of the assessment cycle. So the homestead tax credit. It limits the taxable assessment increase per year for your principal residence, for the principal residence of the owner. So the homestead tax credit is a one-time application. The deadline is May 1st for anyone that has not yet filed that application. And what it does is it limits the amount of increase in the taxable assessment to no more than 10% above the previous year's taxable assessment. It's to protect homeowners that is their principal residence from increases in market value that exceed 10% a year. But in order to qualify, you must apply, and you must own and reside in the property for 1 full tax year, including July 1. Again, the deadline is May 1st to be eligible for any tax credit for July 1. And there is a website, the onestop.md.gov, where you can apply online. There's also paper applications, but the online application is the best method to use. And you can always contact our office for any questions or help with the homestead tax credit. So the homestead tax credit, we also call it the 10% cap because Montgomery County has traditionally elected a 10% cap. As you can see from this slide, other counties choose different percentages. Yeah, 0%. Yeah, that's pretty nice. But the cap itself is great because you know, in a rising market, when the assessments exceed more than 10% a year, it protects the homeowners that occupy the property as their principal residence. It protects from any increases over 10% for tax purposes. So your assessment notice has the regular assessment, which there's no limit in increase or decrease in a market value. It's just, you know, whatever the market says the value is, that's the value. However, for tax purposes, the assessment notice shows the taxable assessment, which that value is capped at 10% over the previous year's taxable assessment. So that's a
And
good
just
thing.
to confirm, Baltimore City is the only municipality that has the authority to establish their own cap. Everyone else falls under their respective counties, correct?
Correct. Yes. Okay. So the homeowner's tax credit, we heard some information about that earlier. That is an application that must be filled out every year, unlike the homestead tax credit, which the homestead tax credit is a one-time application. The homeowner's tax credit is income-based, and you must reapply every year. Same website, onestop.md.gov, but the property must be you must own and have a legal interest in the property. It must be a principal residence, and the net worth cannot exceed 200,000, and the combined gross income cannot exceed 60,000. Different types of tax exemptions that the state offers. There's a blind exemption that's for persons that are legally blind. They receive a $15,000 credit off of their assessment, their taxable assessment. So I mean that's pretty decent, $15,000. Then there's the 100% disabled veterans exemptions. That's for service members that are 100% service connected, permanently and totally disabled. And the exemption is for the primary residence. And there's a disabled active duty service member exemption. And also you must be service connected, permanently disabled in order to apply to be eligible for that exemption. And the property must be the primary residence, and the exemption is applied to the land and the buildings. And the surviving spouse of a 100% disabled veteran can continue to receive the exemption of the disabled veteran after they pass away. The veteran must have been a Maryland resident at the time of their death. A surviving spouse of a military casualty can also apply for an exemption. The individual or surviving spouse must have had their primary residence in Maryland at the time of their death in order to receive this exemption. So the assessment worksheet, you can obtain a copy of your own worksheet at any time by contacting our office, free of charge. Reevaluation required. Valuation out of cycle. So we talked about reassessment notices that went out at the end of December. Well, there are also assessment notices that go out of cycle, so outside of the regular triennial reassessment cycle. So any property that has a substantially completed new construction that adds at least $100,000 in value would receive an out-of-cycle assessment notice. Zoning classification that is changed at the owner's request could be revalued out of cycle. A change in use or character, an erroneous calculation or measurement, and properties that are rezoned pursuant to Tax Property Article 8-226, or any property where a subdivision occurs would also receive an out-of-cycle assessment notice. Appealing your assessment. Oh, Brian's turn. Yay.
You did great.
What did I say? Oh, February. Oh,
So
45 days.
So yes, so Ava, so the deadline to appeal is February 13th, not April 13th. 'Cause that math wasn't math in.
Could we please have April though,
45 days.
just
Thank you.
And then one other thing that I'd like to tackle, when we were talking about the assessment notices that came out that said improvements, and that was so confusing, that has since changed now. The word says structures.
Okay.
So, sorry. So that now says structures instead of improvements because of all, we kept getting phone calls. Everybody was getting phone calls. I didn't make any improvements to my property. How can you charge me for improvements? No, it's improvements to the land. So we just made it simpler by saying structures. So you get your notice of assessment. How can you appeal it? Well, or if you want to appeal it without a notice, there are several ways to file an appeal. When you get that notice of assessment, that 45-day deadline, and just make sure the maths on that, There's also something called a petition for review. This is an out-of-cycle appeal. It's basically in the interim of the 3-year cycle, asking us to take another look at the value of the property. There's a form on our website for this, or you can ask our office. And this is due, here's what the law says. No later than the first working day after January 1st of that year for that year. As y'all know, that's a moving target. So I like to tell people, get it in by December 31st. So that way it's in, because January 1st is a Saturday. Well, the 3rd is the Monday. January 1st is a Tuesday. Now it's Wednesday. So that's always a moving target. And then if a property is purchased between January 1 and June 30, we have a new owner appeal or a purchase, appeal upon purchase. You have, I believe it's 60 days to follow that appeal as a new owner of the property. So appealing on reassessment. So you're appealing the value that's shown on that assessment notice. So you can appeal it online. There'll be a control number on your notice that you can input into our our website, or you can mail it into us. We'll even accept it via email as a PDF or an attachment. You can walk it into our office and hand it to us. You can send it by a FedEx, UPS, so long as we get it by that deadline. And then, as we've said, 45 days from the date, and it's always on that notice, whatever type of notice, whether it's a new construction, whether it's a change in zoning notice, whether it's a reassessment notice, it's always going to be on that notice for you. And then, as I said, the petition for review is used to file for property values outside of the normal cycle, first working day after January 1st. When events have occurred that may cause the property value to decline, market changes, market is fluid, if the market goes down, we're not reevaluating every area every year. We're only doing the 1/3 of the county. So if the market declines before we get back around to it, you can file that petition for review in the interim to address market fluctuations. So we said January 1st, but before July 1 for the appeal upon purchase. There's a little bit, I will say there's a little bit of gray there. If June 30th is a Friday and that's when closing is and it doesn't get recorded at the courthouse until July 5th, we'll allow it because the settlement occurred June 30, so you took possession June 30. It's not your fault that it didn't get recorded until after the 1st. So, but generally it's before July 1. And then it's 60 days. Again, the form can be requested or downloaded from our office, and it's for when the sale price indicates that the property value has declined. So there are 3 levels of appeal. First one is supervisor's level with a local assessor. It's with the supervisor or their designate. And generally that means you're going to get one of our assessor staff. Then the second level is the Property Tax Assessment Appeals Board. They're a 3-member panel. They're Montgomery County homeowners. They are independent from our office. And then the third level is the Maryland Tax Court. With an administrative judge, the proceeding is recorded. There's sworn testimony evidence. It takes place in one of our conference rooms, but it's like you're actually in court. So we talked about 4 hearing options: in person, written, telephone, video. Regardless of the way that you want, that you request to have your appeal, it's your opportunity to provide your reasons to us as to why you feel the value is incorrect. And so when you file your appeal, we're going to send you a worksheet, your worksheet, and we're going to send you a listing of all the sales in your area. Not necessarily the specific comparable sales that we use to value your property, but all the sales in your area. That includes split levels, split foyers, townhouses, all of that to kind of jumpstart your research. And then you can also obtain other sales data through other sources, including our website, Redfin, Zillow, Contact a Realtor, those types of things. This is pretty informal. You know, we're having a conversation. Hey, why do you think your assessment is you know, incorrect? And you want to provide information that affects the value. And you know, it's always an advisable thing to review that worksheet. Are there any inaccuracies? Maybe we have you for an extra bathroom. Maybe we have finished basement that you don't have. Maybe there's something that's not quite right. This is the time to address it. Focus on the points of that affect value. Indicate why you think the total market value does not reflect the actual market. And again, you know, there's inaccurate information. You can provide other information to us. You can show us pictures, those kinds of things. Now, here's where we're gonna talk a little turkey here. So, we want arm's length sales. No short sales, no foreclosures, no bank sales, none of that. We don't want to know about the past a comparison of the past value. I'm going to skip the next one, come back to it because it's going to be a little bit longer of a discussion here. No non-arm's length sales. We know there's a percentage of increase, 20, 30, whatever it might be. We can't help you with your tax bill. That's Montgomery County. Or you know, you guys as a city, but we're the state. And we can't really do anything about services that are rendered or not rendered. Now, the big point here is to avoid comparing assessments. That sounds like a very easy thing. People come in and say, my neighbor's assessed less than I am. Several points that I really want to make about that is, number one, who's to say your neighbor's assessment is correct? Maybe theirs is wrong and yours is right, number one. Number two, there's actually tax court case law in Maryland history that says that inequity of assessment is not basis for appeal. That's straight out of the tax court decision. The remedy provided by the tax court was to appeal your neighbor's assessment. If you think theirs is wrong, appeal it to get it increased. So the other thing that I tell people is we've talked about there's three universally accepted approaches to valuing property. Cost approach, income approach, market approach. If you look at the definition of those approaches, nowhere in the definitions say anything about comparing assessments. And if we're looking for the market value, we want to focus on sales. That's the primary focus, but also those conditional issues that we wouldn't know about, or those factual inaccuracies that may appear, or any questions about the worksheet. We have some terminology on there that people may not be familiar with. We're happy to answer those questions. So once we've had an opportunity to review everything, not during the hearing, be after the fact, and we've had a chance to review everything and render our decision, we send what's called a final notice of assessment. And it has the conclusion of value. And it also gives you another deadline, 30 days from the date of that notice, you can file for the next level. And it'll tell you what that is. And that's anybody's guess because it's based on when that notice goes out. And so your notice might go out with one date, and then 2 weeks later, when Mr. Eubanks' notice goes out, it's 30 days from that date. So, you know, it just depends on that date of that notice. And so then when you get to the second level, when they've had their say, they will issue an order. You'll have 30 days from the date of that order to file it to the tax court. If you're not satisfied with tax court's decision, you can go to circuit court, but all they're going to do is judicial review. Unless the law has been violated, they're not touching it. So they usually generally stay out of the business of tax court cases. That's why we have tax court. Any questions for either Ms. Garvey or myself?
Councilmember Hanzak.
Yes, thank you very much. That was really helpful. I just have one question, I think, and I'm not sure if I perhaps misunderstood. When you spoke about assessing residential property and you talked about the application of the market value indicator, and then on the next slide, on another slide, you then elaborated on the neighborhood adjustment index. I just want to make sure I understand if there's more than one thing going on here, like a criteria for assessing. I guess what I really want to get at is if you have a house, let's say anywhere in Tacoma Park, and you are assessing comparable sales, what net is usually cast? Is it usually based on zip code? Is it based on school districts? Is it based, what is the basis for a comparable sale besides this is within 2 or 3 blocks? Because just even within our small city, I would say there are some micro regional differences in values of houses, and it wouldn't be reasonable to compare a 3-bedroom on one side of the creek to the other side of the creek, even though they share the same zip code.
Okay, so I mentioned that we used a modeling approach. So we model like style. Sometimes we model like ages, story heights, that sort of thing. We model those properties together. We use sales of the same model in order to determine what the assessment value ought to be. So we would never, shouldn't say never, but we don't use sales of, say, Ramblers to determine the value of 2-story houses. So we would review and analyze the sales of each different model of property, and then we would check our assessments against the sale price to assessment ratio to see how well we did. If we are, say, over 1 or below 90, 95, then we know that our assessments are either going to be too high or too low. So we try to stay in a range of like 95 to 98% of the sale prices. And we find if we are within that range, then we have solid support that the assessments are correct.
So just a couple things here. Number one, we use the terms market value index and neighborhood adjustment interchangeably. It used to be called the market value index. It's now referred to on the worksheet as the neighborhood adjustment. But that's the multiplier that we use to convert from cost to market. So sometimes we get in the mindset of Mrs. Garvey and I have been around long enough that we remember when it was spelled out as the market value index. So sometimes we get in the mindset of calling it the market value index, but we have to kind of take a step back and say, no, it's called the neighborhood adjustment now. We don't use bedrooms as one of our metrics when we're comparing properties because we use exterior square footage. So if two identical properties had what's listed as 5 bedrooms, but one family moved in and used all 5 as bedrooms, and the other family used 3 as bedrooms, 1 as a den and 1 as a home gym, who should we tax more? Because one's not using them all as bedrooms, or one that is. So we concern ourselves with the exterior square footage, not what the rooms are determined to be. And so to your point, Council Member Hanzak, about a 3-bedroom on one side of the river compared to the other side, we generally have our hand on the pulse of the market, and we would generally know that there's a different market for those particular type of properties depending on those micro pockets. And we would want to use, if we're using one side of the river, we want to use sales of like properties on that side and not necessarily use ones on the other side. Now, if there was a dearth of sales, we could use the ones on the other side, but then extrapolate a little with an adjustment to say, okay, we know that this is down because it was on this side or up because it was on this side of the river, but how does that affect the other side?
Thank you for that. But just to be a little bit more to the point, do you use school districts, for example, as one of your market indicators? And if not, can you tell me why?
For us, the market speaks. The market is the market.
Yes.
And to take a micro look and say this pocket with this school cluster versus this pocket with this school cluster, but the houses could be the same, except maybe there's a little bit of a difference because of the schools. That's reflected in the market values. So we're not saying, well, we can't use this for a comp because it's in a different school cluster than this one. We're saying it stacks up data wise, and we recognize that maybe that little bit of difference in value is that school, but when you put the houses together and compare them apples to apples, they're comparable, and so we don't really concern ourselves with school district in that regard.
I'm sorry to belabor the point, but one more time, and I appreciate that. So would it be fair to say, though, that when you're looking at a city the small size of Tacoma Park, that in general you would use comps from our zip code? Would that be a fair enough statement, or you think it's actually much more nuanced than that in the
Stay
modeling?
within Tacoma Park.
We stay within Tacoma Park for Tacoma
Unless
Park.
there were no sales in Tacoma Park, then we would branch out to outside.
So we're not going to use Kensington. We're not going to.
No, I'm curious if it goes more micro than that. That's what I'm asking. It's hard to say.
I think what Councilmember Hozak, please, I don't want to speak for you, but the zip code of 20912 includes areas that are outside of the municipal boundaries. So when you're doing, and I know that we as a city, we're assessed as the entire city at one time. So I guess the question is, when you are looking at market value, are you considering the market value within the municipal boundaries when you're looking at the comparisons, or are you venturing outside?
No, we would stay within Tacoma Park in order to get the values.
Thank you.
Yep.
Gosh, I think I saw Councilmember Schlegel first.
Thank you. I guess this is on the same topic, so I'm curious about, because we have a variety of housing styles, how far afield you go in looking at comparables when there isn't much supply of same model house style nearby. Is there a certain sample size that you're aiming to get? For example, let's say that there's only one Cape Cod on the block, and there's 3 within 3 blocks, or but maybe they haven't been sold. Like, would you go to the far end of town, and at what point would you say, okay, we've got 5, we've got 10, we've got 15 comparables, we can make a judgment, we have a big enough pool?
So I would say that we don't at least when I do an assessment, I'm not saying how many comps am I going to find, but if I find 2, 3, 4 sales that are of the same ilk that give me a credible result, then that's what I'm concerned with. So if for example, your Cape Cod, if there are no sales of Cape Cod homes on that street or within a couple blocks, as long as I'm within the Tacoma Park municipality and there's one on the other side of town that stacks up against this one, same quality of construction, similar square footage, similar lot size, that did sell, and that will give me a more credible result than using a rancher right next door, then I'm going to use that Cape Cod across town because it will give me a more credible result.
That's interesting. So just as a quick follow on, it might be that for a homeowner who's watching this or the recording of it, if they feel that their structure is pretty idiosyncratic in model style for that area, they might be able to go to for the first round, the supervisor appeal, and say, it's kind of odd because I suspect that this house is being compared to ones that are maybe in quite different parts of town, where there may be other factors in play other than just square footage and model.
Yes. However, what I would say to that is the burden of proof is on the person who files the appeal, so the appellant. So they would have to prove to us with whatever sales data they felt was relevant to suggest that their property was, we shouldn't, they think, well, you should have used these sales instead. Well, that's fine, but maybe we're going to vet those sales to determine why we wouldn't have used them or why they're not necessarily good comps.
Sure.
But yes, they can come to us and say, hey, I think that I'm a one-off, or, or.
They might say, okay, so you compared apples to apples, but I got some pears down the street. Yeah, they're ranchers, same square footage. I'd like you to look at that because it's the same street.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Schlegel. Councilmember Landman?
This is a question to clarify some of the terminology. When you refer to this style, I'm a little unclear. For example, brick versus clapboard, or is it only with respect to the structure, Cape Cod versus Rambler versus split level or something like that? If you could be a little bit more explanatory.
So we do have a classification for whether it's a brick house or a frame house or there's clapboards, siding or whatever. But when we say style, we generally mean story height. So 2-story would be a colonial, 1.5 is a Cape Cod, split level, split foyers. So whether they're brick, frame, stone, whatever the construction is, if it's a colonial, it's a 2-story colonial, regardless of whether it's brick or frame or whatever. So we're referring to style more than anything else.
Thank you. Councilmember Dabala?
Yes. I had sent in a couple of questions, and I wanted to just explore them a little bit more, and thank you for covering, especially the multifamily one. So just to, my first question has to do with how multifamily apartment buildings are evaluated, are assessed versus single-family homes. And I think you said that they are done differently.
Yes.
They are done based on commercial, on income.
Yes.
And so can you just be a little more on what do you mean by income?
Okay.
For a multifamily building,
Okay.
not for a business.
So every 3 years when we reassess the third of the county, we send out to commercial properties an income and expense questionnaire. We send that out around March. It's due back around May. And then we send out a reminder in May, given a final deadline until June. And we're collecting rental rates, expense rates, that kind of information. We use the information that we collect in order to determine the value, to determine the rental rates, the market rental rates that we should use, market expenses, that sort of thing. And then we apply a market rate, capitalization rate to that income to convert it to a value. That's how we evaluate multifamily.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Very helpful. And then my second question had to do with looking at values assessments throughout the city, and thank you to the city staff for having posted, in case some people haven't noticed it yet, for having posted the 2025 assessments, a map of all the assessments in the city, so you can look at, you can spy on your neighbors, and you can look at your own and find out what category it's in. But also, if I look citywide, I see that 6 years ago, it was all over, some went up, some went down, some stayed the same. 3 years ago, most everything went up. It seems like this time we're back to some went up a lot and some went down a lot. So my questions is that some of the neighborhoods, including one that looks like it mostly went down, are very uniform houses. So presumably you got your comps from fairly close to close to a house, because there's so many of them are very similar. But do you have any comment on why it would be that it appears to be kind of clustered? Some micro neighborhoods, to borrow a word from Councilmember Hanzak, seem to have mostly gone down. some seem to have mostly gone up. Is there some comment you can make about those trends?
The only thing that I can say about that is that the assessments follow the sales. So when we look at, our models, say,
So
I don't know,
back to the sales. Yeah.
yeah, say split 4 years. When we evaluated those sales, and this is just an example, we could have found that the split 4 year models were not selling for as high in this market as they were selling 3 years ago, and that that indicated a market value index that particular model needed to go down. When we were looking at the assessments at the end of the reassessment cycle, we did notice that some were going down, and the manager that's in charge of Tacoma Park, she's a very, very knowledgeable person. She's been working with the assessments in Tacoma Park for at least 3 assessment cycles, so she knows it very well. So I reached out to her and asked her, and I said, I noticed that some of these values are going down, or was that right? And she looked at it again. She said, yeah. When I looked at when I analyzed the sales of these models, the sales indicated that these models should go down in value, and so yeah, some of them did go down and some did go up, but yeah, it's the sales data does support the ones that went down and the ones that went up.
Okay. And as a follow-up to what Councilmember Schlegel said, so if a house is a 2-story, but it's not a colonial, and it is kind of a one-off thing, then I can say from having appealed 3 years ago that it does go wider. It's still within Tacoma Park, but it's not in your neighborhood, because you have to go further to find those more unique looking houses. And a question for the city staff, again, on the overall assessments. When does the estimate of revenue, now that we have more fine-grained total of what the assessments are, because some of them go up, some of them have gone down, et cetera. So at some point, I know there's a revised revenue number from the anticipated.
We get our estimates from the state.
And when is that?
Mid-February. Is it like February 14th, Susan?
So it's real soon. Okay. I just couldn't remember. What to just explain to the state.
When we evaluate when we determine the revenue for the property tax, we take into the account of first accessible value that is sent to us by the SDAC, and that is called constant yield tax rate. Okay, and that is an accessible value that is provided on that certificate. And the other factor is the city determine what is the rate for the property. So these 2 factors determine our revenue. For the past year, we did not have any tax rate increase. The only increase is due to the accessible value.
Okay, so there was an estimate in the financial projections, but when we get the revised numbers from the state, and that'll probably be February 14th, then giving you a little time to crank it, then we'll have a more precise revenue
We
estimate.
usually receive a more accurate estimate, and it's provided by the county.
Oh, so
they usually provide a spreadsheet that include all the property accessible value at the beginning of the fiscal year. Okay, so we estimate our revenue around maybe February, but the actual estimate that is more accurate provided by the county is in July or August. And at that time, we should receive a file of the total city's real property tax revenue. And then but that revenue is not completely accurate because as two of our guests already mentioned, there are always appeals, okay? And appeals can come in different time. So how does the appeal reflect on our revenue is we receive the revenue file, property tax revenue file from Montgomery County every month. And on that file, we can see that there are revenue adjustment. Revenue adjustment meaning that some property owners were able to successfully appeal. And then their assessable value went down. That's why our revenue that the city received is going down. So that's how it reflects our entire cycle of how much total revenue we receive. Okay, so there are a lot of different factors that leads to the changes of our total revenue at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for clarifying when that all happens.
Thank you very much, Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Westlake.
Yeah, thank you so much for this presentation. And thank you to the staff that made this map available. This is really, really helpful. I'm looking at a section of within my ward where if you look at the whole city, it's segregated by kind of the percentage change, and it's kind of speckled all over most of the city. But there is a chunk of Ward 6 where it is all the highest percentage increase. And just tapping around, most of them are in the 35 to 45% increase. But I mean, I just found one that went up by 74%. But I guess my question is, what would bring about for literal near universal change for multiple blocks, like an entire area, to have all gone up by a huge chunk when really the rest of the city, it's much more varied?
So again, we don't set the market, we follow the market. So the only answer I can give is that when we reviewed the sales, they showed that there was an increase, and whatever percentage the market shows that assessments need to increase, that's what they increase, because assessments have to reflect 100% of market value. We're always looking back. We don't project or look ahead. We look at sales that have taken place, and we analyze those sales, and we determine the value based on those sales. So the sales indicated that the assessments needed to increase.
It may just be that particular pocket had the highest concentration of those, the ones that increased. So it's not anything that we're looking at. So if the market says this quadrant is up, then that quadrant is up. If the market says that this street is down, then that street is down. So it's more of I like to say it's decoding the market, making sure your decoder ring has the right language on it. So.
Okay, thank you. I just almost wonder if, like I said, given everything else is much more varied, and it does seem in line with what you're saying about kind of the nuance of comparing the right things, whereas this, it almost looks like maybe there was only a few houses sold and they were the fanciest of the houses, and it kind of brought everything up, even though it's not necessarily reflective of that. But
and that is possible if there was just 3 or 4 sales in that particular area that were higher than other things, then that could draw those up. So again, it's what's the market saying?
And I guess to piggyback off of Councilmember Westlake, and that was similar to a question that I had, because I know that area that you're talking about very well. I live near there, and I could tell you there were a couple of houses that sold recently. And I'm like, these people must be really loaded or dumb. Like, in what world would you pay this much money for this house? One question though that I do have is, so are you looking at a specific time frame in which the sales occur? Is it sales that have occurred, like, are you looking at the average? Because it could be the case that because of all of these other external factors that are happening in the world, people are willing to pay a lot more for a house due to some, blip in demand. Whereas if we looked at sales over 3 years to see what the average sale was, would be perhaps maybe a little bit more realistic of market demand.
So we look at all the sales that have taken place since the last reassessment occurred. So we look at, so this was the 2025 reassessment. So we place more weight on the sales that happen closest to the date of finality, which is the 1/1/25. We look at sales that happened in 2024, 2023, and 2022. The least weight is placed on the 2022 sales because they're just too old. But 2023 and 2024 are the sales that we concentrated on when we were determining the values.
Yeah, any sale in the last 3 years is fair game for us. However, as Ms. Garvey said, a 2022 sale is not going to give an accurate indication of the market as of 1/1/25, as a late 2024 sale or 2024 sale would. We don't generally average, add up all the sales in the model number, divide by, find an average that way. If you have more than one sale in a particular model number, it helps to give you a better idea of the market. And, some might be up a little, some might be down a little. So you kind of have to but we're not sitting there doing a statistical average to determine those values. We're looking at the sales, vetting all the sales. Are they, because if they're short sales or estate sales or those kind of things, we want to exclude them because they're not a market transaction. So once we get down to our market sales, then we're going to start digging into them and looking at the listing pictures and seeing what they have and what they bought for that amount of money, and then using those sales to then determine the market for everybody else in that model number.
And what about new construction? We've seen in the neighborhood where people are, in essence, popping up new little mini, very, very nice little mini homes. Not many at all. They're quite large. But are you looking at those like new construction sales, and how do you weight that?
So we wouldn't use the new sales to determine the market value of the older properties. That's part of the modeling too. So the newer construction would have their own model, and they would be used to determine the market value of the newer models. But we would, within the models, we take age and construction quality and story height into consideration. So the newer construction, again, we would use those only to determine the market value of the other new construction.
Yeah, because it would certainly skew the market if you're using a brand newly constructed home that sold for $1 million to value a $300,000 bungalow. So you want to try to stay away from that because it's not going to give you an accurate indication of the market value. But you could use that $1 million new construction sale to value a home that's 2-3 years old that's similar because it's of the similar vintage and those kinds of things.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Landman.
Following up on the mayor's question just now, where we have properties that they're not going onto undeveloped land, but they are in effect tear downs with new houses, even though they may play games with leaving one wall up and making it a rehab or something. But so this makes me wonder about valuation about two different things. First of all, how do the value of the unimproved land, how does that change over time if you see a pattern where lands or properties are being purchased and in effect the person is buying the land not for the improvement but for the underlying land? Does that affect valuation? I've had a taxpayer say to me, valuations for the underlying land versus the improvements seems to be rather fixed, and I wonder if that's accurate. And then I have a follow-up question about valuation for commercial properties.
Okay, so for land valuation, we use vacant lot sales and tear down sales to determine the value of land.
You do, oh, and so what fits in the tear down category then? That's very helpful. To know.
So like you were like, we get a copy of all the permits that are taken out. So if we come out and we see, okay, the foundation still stays, there's one wall up, it's a renovation or it's completely down to the ground, that's a tear down. It was purchased because it's, in whatever shape, it's purchased at a depressed price to then be torn down and rebuild. That's ostensibly the land, so we use that as well as vacant land sales. And there are instances where the land values stay the same because of the market of those things, or so, but we do account for those in the market by using vacant lot and vacant and tear down sales to determine our land values.
Thank you. And for valuing commercial properties, you mentioned income as and so to understand, for example, for a shopping center, is it the income that the tenants pay to the landlord that determines
Yes.
income, or are there other factors in
Yes.
addition to that?
It's rental income. It is, it's rental income. Other income would be business income, and we don't consider that.
Councilmember Schlegel?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, your presentation is really helpful, and it's going to be helpful to a lot of residents. I had a couple of questions. One was just following up on Councilmember Landman's inquiry regarding the determination of land value on the basis of a pool of tear downs or vacant lot purchases. As you know, in Tacoma Park, we have a historic district, which probably puts a damper on tear downs happening. And so is that factored in if a home is in a district where, or property's in a district where the improvement is very unlikely to be torn down, is that land still potentially being valued on the basis of other areas of the city where there are tear downs happening?
The land values are pretty pretty uniform. It's so we would we would look at we try to keep the land value. So okay, I'll say this. So some houses that people would consider a tear down, some people buy them to live in them because that's what they can afford.
Mhm.
So we have to keep that in mind when we're setting land value. So if we went directly to the value of the tear down and place that land value as on all the properties, then there would be little room left for the building value in something that would be considered a tear down. So we have to we use a rule of thumb that the land value is about 30 to 50% of the total value. So we would look at the tear downs, and we would look at the new construction, and we would determine a land value that that would make sense for the neighborhood. So we wouldn't necessarily go right to putting $1 million on the land because that's what tear downs are selling for. We would say, well, what value would make sense to be, in the 30 to 50% of the total value range for properties, so that there would be an improvement of building value that makes sense for both tear downs and for new construction, so to speak.
And I think one thing to keep in mind that might be beneficial for your residents, if they're intending to appeal, discuss total property value. So because if we're going to lower it, we're more likely to lower the house value portion of the total value, but the total value is what gets lowered. So to come in and specifically talk about land, or specifically talk about the improvement value, we're looking at the total property value. So we could get in the weeds tonight and in an appeal situation talking about nuances of land and that sort of thing. But ultimately, it's the total property value that, if people are going to appeal, that's what they need to be concerned with.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yep.
I just had another question, that because I've had many questions from people about why have some properties gone up 100, like no changes were made to the property, but it's gone up 100,000 or 71,000, and another one went down 41. And I'm wondering, in your time, your years of doing this sort of work, have you seen other periods when interest rates were changing quite a bit over a 3-year period, like what we saw due to the pandemic? We saw interest rates that had been low for a long time suddenly leap up quite high. And when you're just sitting around the water cooler and speculating, you know, do you kind of think, oh yeah, we can kind of see how in areas where there was a big turnover happening, we started to see values go down because the interest rates had gone up so much?
I mean, I don't know that we necessarily, at least the way I was taught, we don't necessarily concern ourselves with what the level of the interest rate is. What's
Just
the
wondering
market
whether that
value? Because the
influences
market,
the sale price because people are calculating the interest.
I mean, the sale prices reflect the interest rates.
Yeah.
So we're not saying, well, it's a 7% interest rate, we got to put values at this. It's a 3% interest rate, we got to put it at this. We're just saying that the market reflects what those interest rates are.
I understand.
So I don't really.
Have you just wondering whether you had seen whether interest rates going up had led in some areas to devaluation?
I mean, I really haven't seen.
I don't know.
I don't know that I've
I
even
think
charted that. you know.
Interest rates, yeah, we don't really study that, but I think interest rates going up probably added to houses staying on the market longer, that sort of thing. But I think values overall are still going up overall. They're still going up, even with the interest rates being higher. We haven't seen a trend where overall, you know, values are tanking. Like, we haven't seen that. That hasn't happened yet.
Right, and there could be specific reasons why a property's went down in value. Maybe it appealed and got a reduction, and then the neighbor didn't appeal, so they didn't get that reduction. So that's why the one went down a little and the neighbor went up because of that. So, you know, that's another reason why we don't compare assessments. So, you know, I know it's an easy thing for people to look at, and it's public record, and what's your assessment versus your neighbor's assessment, you know? But the whole interest rate thing, I mean, we don't sit down and do a say, okay, interest rates are at this level, this is the level that sales are at, so how do we determine? So we don't even necessarily concern ourselves with that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much. This has been very enlightening and is always useful. As I mentioned earlier, one of the challenges with a city of our size is the fact that everyone gets the assessments at the same time. So even it's good to hear that it's not a valid response to say my neighbor went down, because if you check out a listserv once these assessments go out, that's what everyone is talking about. So thank you for the tips and tricks, and we're hoping to share this information with those that are watching. We're hoping to share some of this information with the community. Our staff are working to update language on our website around the various credits, tax credits that you've already mentioned tonight, the homestead tax credit and the like. And we're hoping to make sure that we also are providing easy accessibility to this presentation, because we think it may help people who are working to appeal.
And thank you for having us. And we'd also like to thank Adam Lewis, our state supervisor, and Dan Phillips, our director, for allowing us to come out tonight. We enjoyed that, being here. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. You folks need a break? Okay, let's take a quick 10-minute break, and then we will reconvene with our last presentation of the evening. Okay. Thank you all so much. And a special thank you to the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, SSTAT staff that presented today with was a very enlightening presentation that has garnered just a lot of thoughts post the discussion. And so our last presentation for this evening is the quarterly financial report, FY25 for the first quarter. And with that, I will turn things over to our city manager, Mr. DeSpirito.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and members of the council. Susan Chung, our finance director, and I are pleased to present to you and the public the first quarterly financial report for FY25. You've received a copy of the report, and we have a presentation that I'd like to go through with you, and certainly be happy, Susan and I will be happy to receive comments and questions from the mayor and council, should that be your pleasure.
So I thought Susan was making the presentation, so we loaded it
Oh, okay.
to there. Can we use the remote? Yep. Sorry about that.
No problem. The purpose of the financial, these quarterly financial reports is to present publicly information about not only what we are projected to have received in revenues and projected to have spent by the end of the first quarter of the current fiscal year, but also to provide some comparative information with this time last year, first quarter in FY20. Yes, the period that we're talking about is July 1st, 2024 to September 2024, which was the first quarter of the current FY25 fiscal year. Again, we're to summarize revenue and expenditures during this period of time, try to identify any discrepancies in the year-to-year trends, and provide a basis for any questions or ultimately follow up on anything we consider to be inconsistencies. The executive summary. The total year-to-date actual revenue across all funds is $7.7 million, or 21% of the budgeted for this first fiscal quarter. Total year-to-date actual expenditures across that same time frame is $6.6 million, or 12% of the budgeted amount. Revenue exceeded the expenditures by $1.1 million due to surpluses in the general fund and stormwater fund. Summary, general fund, 1.4 million surplus due to the collection of annual tax duplication revenue that arrived in September. Special revenue fund, 111,000 deficit due to timing of revenue collection and cable grant expenditures. ARPA fund, $94,000 deficit due to delayed revenue recognition in the federal grant. Stormwater management fund, 49,000 plus surplus due to pending projects. And speed camera fund, 162,000 deficit due to delayed revenue stemming from red light cameras resulting from delayed program implementation until December of 2024. The general fund is this is a summary that I will highlight on the general fund. The general fund is the chief operating fund of the city, supports regular daily activities, including police, street and parking maintenance, and general administrative functions. Primary general fund revenue sources are taxes and utility fees and the intergovernmental revenue that we receive. General fund revenues total $7.4 million, or 24% of the FY25 budgeted amount. In FY24, the general fund year-to-date revenues were 7.5, or 26%, so very, very close. General fund year-to-date expenditures were $6 million, or 16% of the FY25 budgeted amount. That's in comparison to last fiscal year, FY24, where the general fund year-to-date expenditures were $6.4 million, or 18%. Again, very close. General fund revenue and expenses whose percentage collected or expended differs by 30% or more year over year is considered significant. Maybe it's best to control it from there.
It's better, but
Yeah. Well, I was, but it was not. Okay. Thank you. The total year-to-date actual revenue across all funds is $7.7 million, or 21% of the budgeted amount. Sorry, we went through this. So it's out of sequence. It's out of sequence.
I think it's, yeah, the next one.
Here we go.
One more.
Okay.
There.
Back on track. Significant differences in revenue collection from FY24 to FY25, period that ended September 30th of last year. Licenses and permits. The comparison, as you can see, between FY25 and FY24. 8.2 thousand and 28.4 thousand. The implementation of the new license program enables year-round revenue collection rather than concentrating payments at the beginning of the period in the previous years. So that speaks to the difference in these numbers and percentages. Use of money and property between FY25 and FY24. Again, a fairly significant difference, 139,000 versus 227,000. The FY25 budget increased to 460,000 from 227,000 in FY24 due to higher interest rates. Police protection. Difference between FY25 and FY24. We've collected in the current fiscal, in this current fiscal year, 131,000, and at this time last year, nothing had been received. This is due to the timing of the SAP grant receipt. This is additional revenue that the city receives. State Aid for Police Protection Grant is a formula-driven funding program used to supplement resources for police protection expenditures in our local communities. State funds provide additional revenue to support the operational costs of local police agencies. It's related, there's a formula, population factors, but they are distributed on an annual basis and in part is calculated against the previous year's operational cost. So this was just a timing issue in terms of the city's receipt of that state appropriation for policing. Sale of city property. Current first quarter of this year, fiscal year, nothing. And last year, $3,500. That's because there were no sales of city property during the reporting period. Significant differences in expenditures between the 2 years for interdepartmental. Fiscal year 25, 594,000 versus 776,000 last year. The FY25 budget increased to 1.7 million from 1.4 million in FY24 due to the inclusion of HCD grant projects and mental health counselor program in the interdepartmental expenditure. Other fund highlights, I won't go through this entire table, but some of the highlights are the speed camera fund. Revenue totals 100,560, or 5% of the budgeted amount. Expenditures total 262,641, or 35% of the budgeted amount. Again, this is comparing first quarter fiscal reporting periods. The red light camera revenue was included in the FY25 budget, but revenue has not been realized and was not during this first fiscal reporting period due to a delay in the program's implementation. As of September 30th, the end of this first quarter reporting period, the city did not collect any red light camera fines. In fact, we are just now, I believe in December of FY24 is when we in reality began to collect red camera revenue following a 30-day grace period, but the delays were due to the State Highway Administration permitting and contract and delays in the contractor implementing the installation of this equipment in the field. Stormwater fund revenues total 120,000 approximately. That's 16% of the budgeted amount. This is received from the county monthly. And expenditures total 71,000, or 7% of what was budgeted for the first quarter fiscal year. Next steps. On February 14th, the city receives the constant yield tax rate. Received that information. In March 5th, my proposed budget book, my budget proposal to the mayor and council is published on the city's website. On March 12th, the following Wednesday, I present this budget proposal to the mayor and council. On March 19th, we begin department budget presentations. And March 26th marks the first public hearing of the FY26 proposed budget. And that is the summary. Again, you all have received, and the public has available to it, the full financial report for the first fiscal quarter of FY25. And Director Chung and I stand by to try and answer any questions that the council may have.
Great, thank you so much. Councilmember Slagle.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of questions. A couple slides back, you mentioned the stormwater receipts and expenditures so far. And it said that there's a monthly payment from the county. And I just never knew that the process with the stormwater fees involved monies going to the county and then being turned back into the city. Am I understanding that correctly?
We collect, is it turned on? We actually collect the stormwater fee together with our property tax, because our billing of the stormwater fee is included in the county's property tax billing. So there is a section in the property tax billing include a Tacoma Park special. That's how we put our stormwater fee in there. And then when we collect the property tax from the Montgomery County, they also send over the stormwater fee
Okay, thank you.
of that month. Yeah.
That
so,
was an ignorant question. I apologize. I remember feeling like I got a separate bill and that I wrote it. The other question I had was just in terms of the name of the fund, Speed Camera Fund. Have you considered, for clarity for residents, to rename it now Speed Camera and Red Light Camera Fund or something like that?
In our financial report, we actually have both names available on the top of the fund summary. So it's currently saying a Speed Camera and Red Light Camera Fund. Unfortunately, we were told by the police chief, probably by next year, which is fiscal year 26, we will no longer have any speed camera revenue. So by that time, our fund will be, the title of the fund will be only Red Light Camera Fund.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I have to check to see if anyone has questions. So first, I just want to say thank you very much. Okay, no worries. Thank you very much to our city management team and Director Chung. And you know, I say this every time, the first quarter is very hard to do much with because it's the first quarter. And so just a couple of quick questions. And I'm not, you know, when I'm going through it, I'm kind of looking to see if there's anything that kind of stands out. And it doesn't really, although the actual expenditure totals year to date on the surface may appear to be low at 12% of our budgeted amount, isn't it normally the case that a lot of the expenditures, particularly as it relates to things like public works contracts and all of that stuff, tends to happen later in the fiscal year?
Especially the capital improvement projects, they are not usually taking place at the first quarter, sometimes because of the contract and the startup of the program. So those expenditures are usually, you know, triggered in at the later part of the quarter, which might be starting in the second quarter, third quarter, something like that. And some of the vendors, we are just very curious to find out they don't want to bill us until it is the close of the year. So we're struggling to ask them to please send a bill to us as soon as possible.
And so I know that we talked about the red light camera and understanding that because of the delays and the grace period that they're, you know, we're hoping to start to see some of those revenues kick in. One question I do have is because of the new licensing program that allows a more fluid approach to collecting those revenues, are we anticipating it being in any way any more difficult to estimate what our revenue inflow will be, given that it's now rolling? So for example, as we're doing these types of reports in the future, it may seem like there are revenues that are a little off, but we know that we're getting them, they're just rolling. So is that something that we should just keep in the back of our minds when we're looking at revenues, especially those revenues associated with some of these?
Yeah, so the new program allowed the rental license, the homeowners to submit their rental license at the time when their license is due. So we actually book the revenue right at the time that we receive via the credit card payment or they send in the check. Used to be we send them a bill at the beginning of the year. And then once we send them the bill, most of the licensed homeowners will actually send in their payment as soon as possible. That's why in the previous years, we always get a bulk of revenue at the beginning of the year or the first quarter. But now, since it is not in that case, our revenue are trickle in, little by little. But I'm sure because we do have the license fee increase by CPI every year, so I assume that the revenue should be a little bit higher than last year.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Councilmember Westlake?
Yeah, thank you so much. I have a couple questions, and I'm just fully wearing my new council member hat. So apologies. The first one, under, the revenue collection. So one of the significant differences was use of money and property and the higher interest rates. What is that? What does that mean?
That is because of the interest that we earn from the investment that we have, and also the interest that we earn in the checking account. In fiscal year 24, because it was during the time that the original interest rate was pretty low, so when we budget for the interest income, we were pretty conservative. The budgeted amount was low, but then once the Federal Reserve increased the interest rate, our actual interest income became much higher. So for this year, we're thinking that the interest rate should be around the same. So we actually budgeted at a higher amount. So that's why, because of that, it looks like that our interest income is lower. It's just because of the percentage of the budget amount that looks like it is lower.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then my other question is around the red light camera funds that has already come up, but I guess specifically, and I'm looking at page 8 of the report, not the presentation. Am I reading this correctly that, okay, so we budgeted a certain amount of revenue to come in over the year, and it's been much less than we had hoped because they weren't up yet. Got that. But then under the expenditures, am I reading this right? That it's $750,000 to run that program? Like we're spending that much money to run the program? Is that initial cost? Like, yeah.
That's only part of the cost. We have in the budget, unlike the speed camera fund, which had to be devoted 100% to traffic safety purposes, red light camera revenues for any jurisdictions that have red light cameras can be used for any municipal purpose. So we have some other police department, what otherwise would have been general fund. This provides a little relief to the general fund. We had some other expenditures I guess embodied in that fund, anticipating the revenues, of course. And they will come. It's just that there was a delay. But this is more than just the expense by design. It's more than just the expense to operate the program. It's a way to get other things paid for, accomplished, and to provide some that margin of relief to the general fund.
Okay, so anticipating for the coming budget year, I know Director Chung, you said that the speed camera will go to zero more or less. But otherwise, would the expenditures for that fund be relatively the same? Or is there
for next fiscal year, we anticipate the program will go away altogether, so there won't be expenses.
right?
Speed.
Right. So, but I'm sorry,
In the
I
red
didn't see
light,
that clearly.
red light, that's a whole other story. That's a bigger fine. It's 75 versus 40, and the volumes are going to be far, far more. Speed cameras can only be in residential areas, and what tends to happen is, and we've seen and known about the decline in revenues over the years. It's kind of a happy conclusion because that means compliance is up.
Mhm.
We have fewer people getting ticketed by these mechanisms for speeding, which means that they're accomplishing what they were, and really safety was the primary purpose for either of these programs.
Right.
With red light, which is new, they can be out in state routes and commercial areas and much, much higher volume, plus the fine is higher. And you're gonna, I guess, encounter a driving population that isn't like in a residential area, maybe just the surrounding neighborhoods, and they get used to it and they understand and they comply, and then the revenues drop. The experience of other cities is that you put red light cameras in high volume traffic areas, you don't see a whole lot of decline.
Yeah.
And the red light, it's a completely different type of scenario.
Okay.
And I do want to add, so candidly, I learned a valuable lesson when it comes to making decisions as a council member as it relates to the budget. Because one of the things that we were trying to do is address additional programming with the expectation that we would get more money, more revenues from the red light cameras, right? Anticipating that they would be installed. And when the installation delay happened and we had to do the period of, the grace period, it meant we went far longer than we anticipated with not getting revenues. And we had already tried to and put certain activities to to City Manager DeSpirito's point. There's a lot more flexibility in terms of what you can try to allocate to that fund than to the speed camera fund. And so what can happen, and this is just a cautionary tale, what can happen is if you are banking on those revenues and you don't know for sure that you're going to get them, and then when we start the reconciliation process and you're trying to figure out how to pay for things without raising taxes, you may be tempted to try to anticipate revenue streams, and you could potentially get it wrong, right? And it could be due to external factors like SHA, being SHA, right? So that is part of the contributing factor as to why there are expenditures in that category. And we also are still waiting for those revenues to try to kick in. Now, our hope is still, once those revenues start to going, because I drove in DC twice and I've gotten, let's not even go there. So the idea that once those revenues start coming in, the expectation or the hope is that they will ultimately help to ultimately catch up to the cadence of the expenditures that we tried to allocate to this line item. Councilmember Westlake,
I think that, yeah, I think my main question was kind of around why expenditures for a fund like that would be high, but it sounds like it's not necessarily because of the cost of the camera.
Right.
It's other things.
It's budget reconciliation.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
No worries. Councilmember Slagle.
Yeah, mine was just trying to get that same clarification, like what, in terms of there's a contract paid to a company and then there's administrative costs, how would you compare what we were paying for those types of costs with speed camera as opposed to with red light camera?
The personnel costs, it's very steady. We have three police officers. We have 3 officers. We're using the speed cam and red light camera fund to provide the salary and fringe benefit. That is pretty steady. That is not changed. The only change is the speed camera as well as the red light camera contract costs.
That's what I'm
Now, right now, since the red light camera is not completely, we're not receiving a lot of fines at this point, so we have not received any contract expenditures for red light. The only contract expenditure that appear and show up in this table is only for speed camera and others miscellaneous costs. So the costs here include the personnel costs of the 3 officers, the speed camera contract, and other maybe inventory costs or supply costs and something like that. And there's no cost from red light camera so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Landman? I'm looking at page 4 of the more detailed document with the general fund revenues. And a couple of interesting columns I just would like to understand. So for railroad and public utilities and for admission and amusement, looks like we budgeted to take in between $240,000 and $250,000 in 2024 and 2025 for the former, and 95 and 115K for the latter. And are those basically contingent upon legislation being enacted for the admission and amusement tax, and but we're still looking for that to happen? And then with railroad and public utilities, we had 0 revenue from that last year. Does that mean we? Anyway, I'd just like to understand.
These
hope over experience or whatever.
These intergovernmental tax revenue, they're always in 2 months delay or 3 months delay. So normally we receive the railroad and utility tax for the month of August. We receive it in sometime in maybe in September or in October or November. So it is usually in 2 months delay. So that's why in the first quarter, you won't usually see any type of intergovernmental revenue, except for this year, we have our tax duplication came in quite promptly. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hanzak?
Just one question. I was wondering if you could comment on the ARPA fund. I'm looking here at the slide number 3, where it says 94,000 deficit due to delayed revenue recognition in the federal grant. Could you just speak to the exact meaning of that?
ARPA fund is a federal grant. So most of the federal grant, even in state, federal, county, we have to spend the money before we can realize the revenue. So that is what he meant by delay realization of the revenue. We spend the money first and we ask for reimbursement. So for this ARPA grant, all our incoming revenue from the Treasury, we were not putting it entirely in the revenue at this time. They were all booked in the unearned revenue, meaning that they were not earned yet. We have to spend the money to justify the revenue amount. Okay, so that is why it is called we cannot realize the money until we spend it. So this is all the same with a lot of different type of grants.
Can I just make sure I understand you correctly? So we spend the money first, right? And then we get reimbursed.
Yes.
But is it not already sitting in a fund that we hold, or is it in the federal treasury?
As I mentioned, the money that we receive from the Treasury, we are not booking it in the revenue. We're putting it unearned revenue. It's like a liability. We're holding it.
We are holding it.
We're
Okay,
holding
okay,
it.
No, that's what. Yes, I'm just trying to make sure that I am secure in that knowledge. That is how I had understood it previously, and I didn't misunderstand that,
Yes.
particularly in light of our current situation.
Yes.
Thank you.
We're holding it,
Councilman-
and then we.
Councilmember, if I-
Yes.
I'm sorry if I may clarify real quick.
Oh, that's Andrew.
Andrew, you just filled the room with your voice
Sorry.
from on high.
Yeah, so we received the total amount as 2 separate payments that we booked over, I think it was in FY21 and FY22, the full 17.47 million ARPA award. And of that, we've been accruing interest, and interest we can divert back to any general fund purpose. There's no restrictions on it. So just to be very clear on that point, we do have the dollars. This is just sort of an accounting measure, as Susan was talking about.
So Deputy City Manager Bodak, I do just want to make sure that I'm understanding aspects of, I guess, federal oversight of those dollars. We met the deadline for obligating those dollars, but we still have to show the government that the work has been done, and therefore we get to pull down the money. So it's pull down in the sense of pulling it from the account to actually use. So it's important for us to make sure that we are holding the money to the side, making sure we're spending what we're supposed to spend, wait until the feds tell us, yes, that is an approved expense, and then use those monies, versus thinking that we could just spend willy-nilly the remaining ARPA monies that we have in the reserve, because they could at any point in time say that something that you submitted is in doesn't meet our requirements for or eligibility for ARPA. But my understanding, Deputy City Manager, is that you've already done your legwork on that. So, all of our
Correct.
items that we've already submitted for obligation have been approved, correct?
Correct. So there's no, I guess, approval process. There's nothing that the U.S. Treasury says, okay, go forth and spend money. We submit a quarterly report to the Treasury, as well as we provide them with our annual single audit results, and certify that those have occurred. There is still always the possibility that the U.S. Treasury could come back at any future date and say, hey, we're now auditing the city of Tacoma Park, and we feel that these were not spent appropriately for whatever reason.
Okay, thank you for that.
But in terms of what has been submitted to the Treasury to date, you're absolutely correct. The full 17.47 million amount has been reported as obligated, and the city at this point has spent approximately 10.5 million.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Honzak.
If I could I just got to follow up on that same issue. So, Mr. Bolduc, does that mean, this is mostly for the public's benefit, but it is my understanding that there are extremely clear guidelines on, in writing, in contractual form with the federal government that says exactly what these funds can and cannot be spent on. Are they very, very detailed? Do you feel strongly that we are fairly secure in the sort of legalese that is behind exactly what we have spent the dollars on and what it can be spent on?
That is
Is my
correct.
question clear?
There's
Thank you.
as we've talked about before, 10 million of the total amount we have flagged as our standard deduction of revenue loss. That has very, very broad and very clear, but also very broad. It's a very broad category in terms of what it can be used for. It's any governmental purpose. The remaining 7.5, you're absolutely right. There are many Treasury categories for the use of ARPA funds that we have aligned and reported specifically with those expenditures.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember DeBala.
One other question along these lines. And so when we report the quarterly report, do we ever get anything back that says, thank you, this looks good, we reviewed this, it's clear? How far behind are they on letting us and other communities know that we've done the reports and spent the money the way that it's, as you said, laid out pretty detailed?
So in my 2 years, I have not seen anything from the U.S. Treasury, and Susan, correct me if there's something before my time that's come in that says, hey, thank you, we reviewed, your last several statements and audit reports, and we've given you the full go ahead. In terms of what we submit, the submission goes through, they say, certify its accuracy, thank you for your submission. As of this point, that's all we've received from the U.S. Treasury.
So besides the quarterly report that the Deputy City Manager submit to the Treasury, annually we also have our external auditor submit a single audit. Any federal grant, state grant that is qualify for single audit has to be reported on an annual basis. So the single audit has to be sent to the auditing section of the Treasury. And this is the part to show them that we are actually following all the guidelines of the auditor, that these grants are submitted quarterly as well as annually. And we never had any question about our filing of the single audit, as well as what the deputy city manager said, that we didn't have any question from Treasury for the quarterly report. So as far as the ARPA funds go, we are good right now.
Great. Awesome. Okay. All right. Okay, any other questions? All right, not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Director Chung and Deputy City Manager Bodak, as well as City Manager DeSpirito for this great presentation. And I think that's all we have on our, well, I know that's all we have on our agenda. And so if everyone's okay, we're going to call this meeting to adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you so much.